All right, guys. This is going to finish up the AP Macro 2013 FRQ. So if you'll just do a Google search AP Macro FRQ, or I think you can even put AP Macro FRQ 2013. It should be one of the first links you see. We're going to do number 3. It has to do with inflation. It's kind of tricky. So pause the video, go ahead and work through the 2013 number 3, and then I'm going to talk through it. Okay, so number 3 says inflation and expected inflation are important determinants of economic activity. Draw a correctly labeled graph of a short-run Phillips curve. All right, so if you look at their scoring guidelines, a correctly labeled graph of the short-run Phillips curve, it's just this. It's drawn the SRPC, the short-run Phillips curve, inflation rate on your x-axis, and then inflation rate on your y-axis, and then unemployment rate on your x-axis. Using your graph in part A, show the effect of an increase in the expected rate of inflation. Okay, so that's pretty tough. All right, so what graph informs your short-run Phillips curve and your long-run Phillips curve? What graph informs this graph here? It's the ADAS model. All right, so if there's an expected rate of inflation on the ADAS model, the aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left. Here's why. Here's my reasoning. The College Board throws this out there sometimes. You see it in multiple choice every once in a while. I think this is the only free response question I can think of where you see this. So it's a rare scenario. So if the expected rate of inflation goes up, what happens on the ADAS model? Aggregate supply shifts left. Here's why. Because if the expected rate of inflation goes up, workers are going to demand higher wages to keep up with those rising prices. That's going to be a resource becoming more expensive. And when resources become more expensive, like labor in this instance becoming more expensive, aggregate supply is going to shift to the left. Well, when aggregate supply shifts to the left, what happens on the short-run Phillips curve? Well, when aggregate supply shifts, your short-run Phillips curve's got to shift. When aggregate demand shifts, it's just movement along the short-run Phillips curve. So if you go into let's say you're here, you go into a recession due to a decrease in aggregate demand, you would just move the point down the curve on SRPC. If you go into an inflationary gap, you would move the point up on the short run Phillips curve, right? So aggregate demand shifting is just movement along the curve. When aggregate supply shifts, you've got to shift the short run Phillips curve. Well, when aggregate supply shifts left, the short run Phillips curve's got to shift right. Remember, this graph kind of mirrors the ADAS model, all right? So aggregate supply shifts left, the short-run Phillips curve shifts right. So aggregate supply is shifting left because our resource, labor, is becoming more expensive because they're demanding higher wages due to inflation. Short-run Phillips curve shifts right. That's a tough one. All right, C says, what is the effect of the increase in the expected rate of inflation on the long-run Phillips curve? It says 1 point is earned for stating that the increase in expected inflation does not affect the long-run Phillips curve. What is the only thing that can impact the long-run Phillips curve? Well, your long-run Phillips curve represents full employment, the natural rate of employment. So the Phillips curve, so something would have to change your natural rate of unemployment. The only thing that can affect your natural rate of unemployment is if welfare benefits either increase or decrease in your country. Okay, so France has more robust welfare benefits, therefore their unemployment rate is more like natural rate of unemployment, is more like 8 or 9%. We in the United States don't have those the unemployment benefits that France does, therefore our natural rate of unemployment is 4 to 6%. Okay, so nothing's going to happen to the long run Phillips curve. The only time it can ever shift is if something happens with unemployment compensation or welfare benefits, however they phrase that. Given the increase in the expected rate of inflation from Part B, will the nominal interest rate on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged? Okay, so 1 point is earned for stating that the nominal interest rate will increase. Okay, why? Well, because banks are going to build that inflation into the nominal interest rate. All right. So if the real interest rate is 2% and inflation was 3%, but inflation ended up being 5%, or they expect it to now be 5%, how do we get that nominal interest rate? The real interest rate plus the expected rate of inflation is going to give you that nominal interest rate. So if the real interest rate is 2% and then inflation goes from 3 to 5, if it was 3%, now it's 5% of the nominal interest rate. If it goes to 5%, now the nominal interest rate is 7%. I know that's probably kind of difficult for me. If I drew it out, it'd be a little bit easier to see. But just remember, your nominal interest rate is the real interest rate plus inflation. Well, if inflation goes up, then your nominal interest rate goes up. Okay. Well, the real interest rate on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged. The real interest rate's not going to change. All right. So the reason being is we don't have anything going on with the loanable funds market here. We just have something going on with inflation. You get higher inflation, you're going to get a higher nominal interest rate. You get lower inflation, you get a lower nominal interest rate. But that doesn't mean anything's going to change with the real interest rate. So there's nothing going on with that loanable funds market that affects the real interest rate. E says assume that the nominal interest rate is 8%. Borrowers and lenders expect the rate of inflation to be 3%, and the growth of real GDP is 4%. Calculate the real interest rate. Well, how do we get the real interest rate? It is the inflation rate minus, the nominal interest rate minus inflation is going to give you the real interest rate. Okay, so 8 is our nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate of 3% gives us 5%. Why are they throwing this GDP as 4%? They're trying to mess you up. They're trying to get you to bring that into the calculation. So no, to get the real interest rate, it's nominal minus inflation. Or to get the nominal, it's real plus inflation. Okay? That would be a really good thing. I'm going to suggest you guys do the same thing you do with AP Gov, where you can write down some key things, some of these key equations. How do we get that? How do we get real interest rate? How do we get the nominal interest rate? You just have those simple equations written out as you guys take this test on May 18th. All right, that's it for today.